What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Super excited about Week 6. Week 5 was pretty interesting. Unfortunately, we lost Dak Prescott and Dalvin Cook, obviously dealing with that groin injury. But other than that, pretty light on the injury front, which is a good thing. We've had quite a few brutal weeks up to this point, so hoping for a much better week here. Couple teams on bye. We've got the Seahawks, got the Raiders, got the Chargers, and there's one more team slipping my mind right now, but we'll get back to you on that one. So a couple buys this week. Got to be on the lookout for that. If you have some of these guys on your team, make sure you check your lineups. Don't start anyone on bye. Obviously, that is going to be key for you guys setting your lineups. But going through here, keeping that in mind, trying to give you guys the best options at this, at their respective positions this week, who are going to be starting. Go over each of these games as we typically do. Not going to waste any time. Let's get right into it and talk about one of the more exciting games on the week. Really excited about this one. Between the Houston Texans and the Tennessee Titans, we typically have a pretty good battle every time these guys play. Right now, the Titans are in commanding lead of the AFC South, coming in at 4-0 versus the Texans at 1-4. Texans looking to try to continue their streak after firing Bill O'Brien, seeing if Romeo Crennel can continue to inspire new light in this team. Deshaun Watson went off against the Jaguars last Sunday. We'll see if he'll have success again going against the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans came out and lit the world on fire on Tuesday night playing the Buffalo Bills. Ryan Tannehill comes out, scores 4 touchdowns in his debut, and basically says, frick everyone that didn't believe in us coming into this game. So should be very, very fun to watch this one. Very high over-under in this one. We've got 53.5 points. As expected, Tennessee's defense has been decent, at least at creating turnovers, but overall, they've been giving up a lot of points, as have the Texans. Neither of these teams are super great against running backs or receivers or tight ends. A little bit better against quarterbacks. I think that has some to do with interceptions, but overall, not really worried about any of our starters here, guys that we're typically looking to start. I think this will be a pretty high-scoring game and should be a lot of fantasy options here. Titans favored to win this one by 3 at home. I'm actually surprised the spread is as low as it is. It does seem like there's still a general disrespect for the Titans, I feel, at this point. They're 4-0, taking down the Bills, who were being looked at as potentially the best or second best team in the AFC behind the Kansas City Chiefs, and they came out and handled them pretty easily. So we'll see how the Titans can do in this divisional matchup, but I like the Titans a lot more than Vegas does right now. In terms of who are starting in fantasy, this is pretty easy for me on the Titans side. I don't know what it is about the constant disrespect that Ryan Tannehill gets in the fantasy community. NFL and CBS had posted on Twitter the other day, since coming back and taking over as the starter for the Titans, the last 14 games, Tannehill, compared to Patrick Mahomes in their last 14 starts, Tannehill has 3,602 pass yards compared to 3,674 for Mahomes. Tannehill has a 31-6 touchdown interception ratio to Mahomes' 28-6. And Tannehill even has a better quarterback rating of 116.7 to 102.3. So I'm not going to make the argument that Tannehill is better than Patrick Mahomes, but people keep looking at Ryan Tannehill as if he's like this bottom barrel replacement quarterback, like a Nick Foles type. Then he's been absolutely studly for fantasy and for real life football. If you need a spot start this week, or if you're just looking for a consistent starter after losing Dak, I really think Tannehill is your guy. If he's out there on the waiver wire, he should not be, especially after throwing up 4 touchdowns on Tuesday night. Ryan Tannehill is going to have a great game this week against the Texans. He did last year in multiple starts against them, and I'm looking for him to have another good game here. Of course, we're starting Derrick Henry. Texans run defense, one of the worst in the league. A.J. Brown looked dominant again, got some time to recover from that knee injury, and it was a knee bruise, the injury that he had sustained, so it's not something that typically lingers. Once you recover from that, it's fine. So unless he sustains a different type of injury, we're not really looking for that to be lingering at all. So A.J. Brown looks like he is in full force again. He was dominant on Tuesday night, looking for him to continue that against the poor Texans secondary in Week 6. Jonnu Smith has been one of the best tight ends on the year. Of the guys that we drafted later, he is leading the entire pack there. So you're starting Jonnu Smith until further notice. And I think you can start the Titans defense in this one. Even last week where the Texans ended up winning, we saw Deshaun Watson throw up multiple picks. So Titans should be able to force a few picks in this one. And the offensive line still letting way too many pressures on Deshaun Watson. So Titans defense, a sneaky start here. Not starting Khalif Raymond. I don't know that Corey Davis or Adam Humphries will be back from the COVID IR list. Probably not. So we're not really looking at starting anyone else besides the main 4 guys there. On the Texans side, we're starting Deshaun Watson. He was, back to being a fantasy quarterback 1 again. Should have another good week this week. David Johnson should still be a decent start. Titans have been okay at slowing down the run, but David Johnson's been pretty consistent, coming in as like a low end to medium running back 2 every single week. So that's probably what you can expect from him again, but at least he's not busting for you. And then of course, Will Fuller, as long as he's healthy, we're going to keep starting him. Now the real question is, are we going to go back to the well with Brandon Cooks? In week 4, he comes out and completely gooses us. And then week 5, he goes off for a ridiculous fantasy performance. Randall Cobb has been more consistent. One of these guys is probably going to end up having a pretty good game here. I know it's hard to bench a guy after he goes off, but I still feel a bit bitter towards the goose that Cooks gave us. I want to see if this is for real or if that was just a single matchup against the Jaguars. So if you had to pick between these guys, I would still take Cooks over Cobb, but I'm looking to see if I have better options on my roster other than going back to the well here with Cooks or Cobb. Now, Akins and Fells from a tight end spot. If Akins is out again for some reason, Darren Fells becomes a really nice spot start for you. But when they're both on the field, Akins has been getting more of the targets, but it hasn't really meant much for fantasy because these guys do still go back and forth in the red zone. Deshaun Watson does love targeting his tight ends in the red zone, so one of these guys are likely to score, but we don't necessarily know which one each week. That's why it was a little bit easier for us to start Fells last week when Akins was out due to that concussion. And Romeo Crennel has said that he wants to get Duke Johnson more involved. I'll wait until I see it before we start putting him out there in our fantasy lineups. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see if he could actually do something in the passing game because he was able to last year whenever they used him, but that was like once every 4 games. So we're not, Duke Johnson is someone that you could probably pick up if he's on the waiver wire. Just throw him on the back of your bench and wait for the game where he breaks out, and then you can either sell high or hopefully he ends up taking over as a nice running back flex spot for you. If David Johnson does sustain an injury, I do think Duke Johnson will still be a valuable asset. If you own David Johnson, you probably want to handcuff him with Duke. I'm not going to start the Texans defense in this one because as we just saw, the Titans can light up pretty much anybody at this point. I like the Titans by a good bit in this one. I got the Titans winning this one 34-27 for the Texans. All right, now let's look at the Baltimore Ravens and the Philadelphia Eagles battle of the birds in this one. Yeah, I'm not really excited for this game. Every week we have a few games that I'm really pumped for. The Texans-Titans game that we just talked about, I'm really excited for that one. This one I'm less enthralled for, but there's a few storylines I want to monitor. I'm frustrated with both of these teams right now for different reasons, as we'll explain when we get to the starts and sits. But in terms of how Vegas is feeling about this one, I feel like we're kind of on the same page. 47 over under, below 50. Anytime it's below 50, that's a little bit lower for the week. Nothing crazy. Right now, the Ravens are implied to win by 7.5 points. So, both of these teams are implied to score above 20. So it should still be at least a decent game for fantasy. But honestly, both of these defenses have been pretty good at slowing down quarterbacks. Both have been really good against the run. That's something we've seen from the Eagles for a while now. The Ravens defense just across the board has been pretty good, especially against receivers. Now, the one spot that you can typically beat the Ravens is the tight end position, which I know it's very difficult if you own Zach Ertz right now, especially after last week. But I feel like this is the week that everyone benches him and he goes off for like 30 fantasy points because that's just how fantasy football works. So as we'll get to in a second, I'm not quite ready to bench Ertz. It hurts. It hurts. The Eagles have been very profitable, though, starting receivers and tight ends against them. So slowing your running backs down, but putting your receivers and tight ends. Perfect for the Ravens because we're not excited about starting the running backs at any point right now. So makes the Ravens starts and sets easy. The Eagles are the ones that get a little more difficult. So we'll start with the Ravens. We'll do the easy one first. Now, Lamar Jackson has been disappointing for fantasy. There's no way of sugarcoating that. If you drafted him, there's absolutely no way you're happy right now. He's had a couple of decent games, and last week and the week 3 against the Kansas City Chiefs, they've been pretty piss poor performances. And I'm not sure whether that knee injury that he was supposedly 100% coming into Sunday, but now he's on the injury report again this week. So he's clearly dealing with some kind of ailment. He has been averaging under 200 passing yards a game. It's been pretty gross. And he didn't even have that many rushing yards last week either. The defense just has been so good that he really hasn't had to do much in their victories, and he wasn't able to, rally the team against the Kansas City Chiefs. There's been some drops, and some of his deep passes have looked good that this just didn't turn into anything, but he's also been missing people deep. I mean, if you have Lamar Jackson, you're not going to bench him, especially not a game against the Eagles where this could end up being a blowout pretty soon. But we thought that last week, and the Steelers and Eagles game turned into a really nice fantasy day. So we could see that happen again here. So Lamar Jackson is still going to remain in our starting spot until we, see a little bit more. If he puts up multiple stinkers, then we can start talking about benching him. But I'm gonna keep the faith in Lamar Jackson, the fantasy MVP from last year. We'll play him again this week. Marquise Brown had himself a really nice day, still performing really well in the air yards category. And, as long as he can continue to find his way into the end zone, it's going to be a really nice receiver asset there. Hopefully he's like your wide receiver 3, but he put up some pretty decent numbers last week, so I think we can trust him again. As we mentioned, the Eagles have been really bad at slowing down tight ends, so fire at Mark Andrews. You're already going to do that anyway, but he should have a pretty good week. Ravens defense, again, with Carson Wentz throwing a record number of interceptions this year, should look for potential defensive score here. Ravens defense, probably the best start on the week. Now, the part about the Ravens that I'm most frustrated with, I'm a little frustrated with Lamar Jackson, but I'm mostly frustrated with the way that this team is deploying the running backs. So last week, Mark Ingram led the team on the ground, he looks pretty washed. I mean, just watching the game, I don't understand why Mark Ingram keeps getting the touches. Whenever they put Dobbins or Edwards in, honestly, both of those guys are running better than Ingram, but they trust him, I guess, because he's been the veteran, been with that team for a while. But I mean, Edwards was there too, so I don't know. We'll see how much longer this team continues to stick with Ingram. Maybe they're just waiting to unleash the rest of their offense when the schedule gets tougher. Last week, Dobbins had 1 carry on the ground. It went for 34 yards. He broke 2 tackles. He looked absolutely fantastic on the run. And then they proceeded to give him 0 carries for the remainder of the game. I'm just baffled by the way that this team is using their running back core. You cannot trust any of them in fantasy. If you had to start one, you got to go with the guy that's getting the volume with Mark Ingram. But like I said, clearly J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards are running with more steam, running with more precision and fire whenever they get the ball. So hopefully at some point we'll get a little more clarity. Hopefully Ingram ends up seeing more of a backup role and we get Dobbins and Edwards more involved. Because if Ingram was out of the picture, I think you'd be able to start both of these guys between Dobbins and Edwards because they're both playing really well. We're not starting any of the other wide receivers here. Not really thinking about that. Now, okay, jumping over to the Eagles. This could be a rough game again. This is a tough slate of games here for the Eagles before things get really easy. So again, this is a good buy low moment for Miles Sanders, especially if he ends up having a down week here. Last week, he bailed you out with that amazing 70-yard touchdown run against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Outside of that, he did get the goal line carry, but that wasn't due to him at all. I think he only had like 10 rushing yards outside of that big 70-yard run. So it wasn't a great performance outside of that big run for Sanders. He's still not as involved in the passing game as we would like to see. He should be getting like 5 to 7 targets a game because, there's such a lack of receiving talent right now. I don't really understand the game script. At some point, we're going to see the massive Miles Sanders blow-up game where he's getting 6 or 7 receptions as well. That should be coming, but we'll see what ends up happening with the Ravens. Eagles could be playing from behind, so maybe we see a little bit more check down there, but there's something wrong with Wentz at this point. He looked okay against the Steelers, but still throwing multiple picks. Just does not have the confidence that he's had. I don't know if he's going to I don't think he's going to regain it here against the Ravens. So if you have Travis Fulgham, you picked him up off the waiver wire this week. He's not the best start by any means, but I do believe the Eagles are going to have to pass a lot. Right now, they're averaging the 4th most pass plays in the entire NFL. So they're going to have to pass a lot if they want to have any chance at keeping up with the Ravens. So I think Fulgham is a decent start, regardless of what you feel about the Ravens. We'll see if he can do it for 3 straight weeks in a row. He's been the best target there, and you're going to want to try to use him before Reagor comes back. Once, Reagor, Sean Jackson, and Alshon Jeffrey are back. It's going to be interesting to see whether Fulgham can beat all of those guys out, but I do think Reagor will eventually take his job back. Now, as we mentioned, the tight end is the one spot you can typically beat the Ravens in. Man, Ertz has looked washed, and I'm very scared putting him in my lineup, and you might have less faith than me. You have another tight end option. I totally understand you putting someone else there, but I'm going to give Ertz one more week. I think this is going to be the week he ends up going off because no one's playing him. Greg Ward did get the touchdown last week, but he's been relegated to second fiddle behind Fulgham. We're not going to be playing any of the other pieces in this offense because of the matchup. Really only comfortable starting Sanders, Fulgham, or Ertz. I have the Ravens winning this one pretty decisively. Got the Ravens 32 to the Eagles scoring 20. Okay, let's jump over and talk about the Atlanta Falcons. Recently fired Dan Quinn and looking to refine their identity after going 0-5 for the first time in a very long time, going against the Minnesota Vikings, who are now 1-4 after letting Russell Wilson come back on them on Sunday night. They definitely let that game slip away from them. Let's not take away from the fact that the Vikings looked really good in that game against the Seahawks. It was a loss in the end, but their defense played pretty strong. Russell Wilson looked pretty pedestrian through the first half. Obviously, Russell Wilson typically picks things up in the second half, which he did again. The Vikings looked good on both sides of the ball. Their defense starting to hit their stride a little bit, whereas the Falcons have been in complete shambles. So this game could go one of two ways. It's either going to be a shootout in which it's really competitive, and you're going to be really happy starting a lot of fantasy options here, or it could go the way that Mike Zimmer wants all games to go, where the Vikings are winning decisively, playing good defense. It's a low-scoring game, and you're not going to be happy with many of the fantasy options here. I'm hoping for the first one, but I'm expecting the second one. 54.5 over-under. Vegas definitely thinks this one could turn into a shootout, and I do think one of the big determinants of whether or not this game will be as high scoring as we're hoping for is Julio Jones. Obviously, Julio Jones missed last week after dealing with that hamstring injury. He's been dealing with it since week 2, injured against the Cowboys. I guess he technically injured it before the season started, but it got re-aggravated in week 2. He missed week 3, came back in week 4 against the Packers, got injured again, missed week 5, not practicing as of Wednesday, but Wednesday is a typically veteran rest day. I don't know what the plan is with the new regime, new coaches taking in. We don't have Dan Quinn fighting for his job anymore. So they might just say, all right, Julio, we're going to keep you on the bench until you feel like you're 100%. I don't know that they're going to do that. And I also don't know that Julio Jones is going to be okay with that because he's a competitor and he wants to, ride out the last couple of years of his career not on the bench. So we'll see. At this point, I'm leaning towards Julio potentially being out, which is why I'm a little more pessimistic about this over-under because Matt Ryan looks completely broken without Julio Jones in tow. If Julio Jones is not active, I'm very scared at starting many of the Falcons' options here. If Julio Jones is back, it gives me a little more confidence. On the Vikings side, we'll jump over and talk about the start sets here in a second. The Falcons have been abysmal on defense. They've been giving up the most points to quarterbacks, the second most to tight ends, the 8th most to running backs and receivers. Vikings have started to pick things up a little bit on defense. They're still giving up the 12th most to quarterbacks, 14th to running backs, and 6th to receivers. That secondary still needs some work, but they're starting to gel a little bit more in their front 7. So Vikings are favored to win this one by 3.5. I'm surprised it's not more, to be honest. But again, maybe Vegas is expecting Julio to be back. As we mentioned, Todd Gurley is going to be a decent start as long as he continues to score touchdowns. You probably don't have a better option at this point. Gurley looked good against the Panthers last week. Granted, the Panthers are the worst run defense in the league, so it's not hard to look good against them, but at least when he had the ball, he was cutting very well. He looked fast. He was able to get to the outside and beat the defenders to the edge. He looked like Gurley. Like Gurley should, and what we were hoping that Gurley would look like in the Falcons. So as long as he stays healthy, he's continuing to get the goal line work. Gurley, and he got a lot of receptions last week too. That definitely boosted his fantasy value. Gurley remains a decent RB2 with RB1 upside. Calvin Ridley, you're pretty much starting no matter what at this point. If you don't like the fact that you have to start Calvin Ridley, you should be trading him before his value goes down because it's still very high. Now, Julio Jones, I have the 4 stars here just to absolutely reiterate. I don't know when you watch this video. I know people like to jump in on this video 3 days after I record it and act as if I'm able to go back and change what I said on Wednesday. I can re-record it, but here's the thing. We're doing this on Wednesday to give you guys a jump start on what we think is going to happen so that way you can make waiver pickups and start setting your lineup or make trades in anticipation of what is going to happen. But things do change. Between today and Sunday, Julio Jones could, completely recover, or he could not practice the whole week and they're going to keep him on the bench. I don't know at this point. So if I had to make a guess, I would say Julio probably sits this week, which means I'm not going to be trusting Matt Ryan. If Julio Jones plays, if he's practicing on Thursday and Friday and it looks like he's actually trending in a positive direction, I'm at least more confident in starting Ryan against this poor Vikings pass defense. I'm not going to go and be starting Hayden Hurst until he shows us something. Last week was just an absolutely pathetic performance against a defense that had been allowing a good bit of points to the tight end. I can't trust Hurst at this point. I'm not really excited about any of the other options here, regardless of whether or not Julio plays. Like I said, if Julio plays, that's the only way I expect this game getting anywhere near the over-under. Otherwise, I think the Vikings are going to win this one pretty decisively. On the Vikings side, I think Kirk Cousins remains a good start this week, with the exception of week 2, where he completely destroyed your fantasy team by putting up negative score. He's been pretty decent playing against the Falcons, who are giving up the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. I think you can start him. It's looking like Dalvin Cook is out. Mike Zimmer kind of changed his tune today and was like saying that maybe Dalvin Cook could actually play. I hope they don't do that. I think that Dalvin Cook could use the rest. Vikings are going on bye in week 7, so if Dalvin Cook could get the week off, let Madison play this one. Madison will be one of the best running back starts on the week. If Cook does play, that sucks because you run the risk that Cook comes out, plays a quarter, re-injures the groin, and then Madison comes out anyway. So if Cook plays, let's say you're in a situation where you picked up Madison and you don't roster Cook right now, like you're split. It's not a handcuff situation. I think you can flex Madison even if Cook plays on the basis of the fact that they're probably not going to give Cook a full workload. If you have both of these guys, you can't ever bench Dalvin Cook, but just expect that there's a chance that he could end up re-injuring this and putting up a pretty poor fantasy performance. That's why if you roster Madison and you're also, the guy that has Cook, you're hoping that Cook sits this week. Madison is a capable backup. He's not as good of a red zone runner. I don't think he's going to score the touchdowns that Cook would, but he's going to get the volume because with Cook out, Madison, we saw what he did against the Seahawks on Sunday night, got a ton of yardage, and I think he'll end up being 80 to 90% of what you'd expect from Cook, especially in this juicy matchup against the poor Falcons defense. So monitor that situation and hit me up in the comment section if something changes between now and then. But as it stands right now, I think Dalvin Cook will sit this week, and Madison remains a fantastic top 5 running back start this week. Adam Thielen is top 3 wide receiver at this point. Should be another good game for him here. And Justin Jefferson should continue his rookie of the year potential, fighting for that spot there. Looking pretty good 3 weeks in a row now. Give him another start here against the Falcons. Irv Smith finally had a showing. He had some decent targets on Sunday night. I'm not going to be playing him in fantasy, but keep an eye on him. We need tight ends. A lot of the tight ends that we were hoping to break out have been pretty inconsistent at this point. Hopefully, they'll start to get Irv Smith a bit more involved because I think he could be a really good tight end in this league, especially for fantasy. But at this point, he's only had one decent game, so just monitor that situation. Not starting Mike Boone or Ole B.C. Johnson or Kyle Rudolph And you could start the Vikings defense if you're desperate. I do think that Ryan is prone to throw some picks here, but he hasn't really been throwing that many picks up to this point, to be fair. So I'm not really that excited about either defense in this one. I think I have my score based on Julio not playing. I got the Vikings winning this one pretty easily, 31-21. If Julio does play, look for this game to potentially be a little bit closer, a little bit more high scoring. But overall, I think this one will hit the under unless Julio plays. Ooh. Now wake up. All right, let's go over and talk about the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Divisional battle here between two surprisingly good teams. We saw last year the Cleveland Browns were the Cleveland Browns, and the Pittsburgh Steelers obviously lost Ben Roethlisberger in week 2, had a pretty piss-poor season with Kyle Rudolph and Devlin Hodges playing. So Big Ben looks to be fully recovered from the surgery that he had. He's been balling out. The Steelers' offense has been phenomenal. Their defense has been good, but it hasn't been lights out like we were expecting it to be. So there's been a lot of fantasy points to be scored, especially through the air against the Steelers. The Steelers are currently allowing the 4th most fantasy points to opposing receivers. They've been great at slowing down the run. With the exception of that 70-yard carry from Miles Sanders on Sunday, the Steelers have been one of the best defenses against the run and have been very good at slowing down tight ends and quarterbacks as well. Whereas the Browns also have been pretty good at slowing down the run, but pretty bad elsewhere. They're giving up the 9th most points to quarterbacks, the 2nd most points to wide receivers, and the 6th most points to tight ends. Vegas expects this one to be a decently high-scored game, 51 over-under. Steelers favored to win this one by 3.5. I'm pretty excited about this game. I think this should be a competitive battle. This is in Pittsburgh. We'll see if Baker Mayfield is for real playing against a team that they're going to have to learn to beat if the Browns want to have a legitimate shot at actually doing anything this year. So this will be a very telling game. On the Browns side, we're going to keep starting Kareem Hunt. I know it's a bad matchup, but Kareem Hunt is involved enough in the passing game that he should be able to get enough work there. Hopefully he can sneak a touchdown in or two for you, but he's so involved in the passing game near the red zone. You're not benching Kareem Hunt for anything at this point, even in a bad matchup. Odell Beckham has been really good. He's looked like Odell Beckham again, which is fantastic. And then Jarvis Landry should be a good start here as well. As we mentioned, the Steelers are allowing a lot of points to receivers. Austin Hooper, a little less excited about him just based on the Steelers' propensity to slow the tight end down. We saw Zach Ertz completely dud out last week. I'm not that excited to start anyone other than the 3 guys between Hunt, Beckham, and Landry. Baker Mayfield at this point just remains an emergency start, even in matchups where it's been a good start. Their run game is so powerful that Baker Mayfield's ceiling is really low, and then playing against a team that could completely rattle him if they're able to get a few sacks with TJ Watt, it could end up being a rough day for Baker. On the Steelers side, I know it seems a little bit precarious, but I'm starting everyone that's healthy. I should put an asterisk for Deontay Johnson because I guess at this point it's still in question whether or not he's going to be able to go this week. He exited early last week against the Eagles with a back injury. Latest reports are that it's not serious and that Mike Tomlin does think that Deontay Johnson will play this Sunday, but monitor that injury report. We're starting Big Ben. He's been phenomenal up to this point. The Browns defense has not been that great against quarterbacks. James Conner, you're pretty much forced to start until he's, as long as he's healthy. I think you can start all 3 of the receivers here. I know Claypool had that massive game last week. We're not expecting anything remotely close to that. If you are, then you're just doing it wrong. Juju was still more involved in terms of routes run, but we'll see how defenses will actually play into seeing now that this team has three legit alpha receivers. One of these guys will probably disappoint you, but I think at this point you have to start all of them until we start getting more clarity on the touch distribution here. I think in a game like this, though, against the Browns, where there should be a lot of points scored, especially through the air, each one of them remains a decent start. Eric Ebron also a decent start in the gross tight end landscape. Got enough targets last week to definitely continue to start him until he plays a rough matchup. I think the Steelers' defense should be able to make Baker Mayfield's day a little bit hectic, so I think they're a good start as well. Lots of Steelers to start here. Basically, you're starting all of your main guys. We're not starting Benny Snell until James Conner misses time. I have the Steelers winning this one. Obviously, based on my starts, that should be pretty easy. I do think the Browns can stay competitive between Landry, Odell, and Kareem Hunt. I think they'll put up enough points to make this a game, but I think the Steelers win in the end, 34-28. All right, so we just talked about a pretty exciting game between the Steelers and the and the Browns, but let's talk about the Bengals and the Colts. So I don't think this one is going to be anywhere near as exciting because, for one, we're talking about a team with a rookie quarterback, and now we're talking about the best defense in the league. I know it's crazy, but at this point, at least from a fantasy perspective, the Colts have been absolutely lights out at slowing down fantasy options, and their offense is doing nobody any favors by being one of the slowest in the league. So in terms of fantasy options here, you're going to have to temper your expectations until we start seeing some seismic shifts in how this team wants to function. The Colts have been the best team at stopping quarterbacks, tight ends, the third best team at stopping running backs, and they're also allowing the 26th most points to receivers. So they've just been lights out across the board. Bengals defense has actually been a little bit stingy as well against quarterbacks and receivers. They've been a little bit more exploitable at the running back and the tight end position. So we'll keep that in mind when we talk about our starts and our sits. The Colts are favored to win this one by 7.5, and I think that's a little ridiculous. Just seeing how the Bengals have been playing. Yes, they got bowled over by the Ravens, but I don't think the Colts are as scary, especially not offensively, as we may have once thought. We saw them struggle against the Bears, who really struggled to put up anything last week. So I do think the Colts they're better on defense than people want to give them credit for, but their offense has been really poor. So in terms of who we're starting this week, on the Bengals side, you're pretty much locked into starting Joe Mixon and Tyler Boyd at this point because they can go off at any point. I'm just not excited starting really anyone else in this week. I guess if you had to convince me or had to say you had to start one more guy, of course you're going to go with T. Higgins. AJ Green may not even play this week, but it's looked like he's completely given up on the team. That interception from Marcus Peters was a ridiculous play. AJ Green just completely gave up, and I don't think he's going to see the field this week. They may even look to trade him, although I don't know that they're going to get anyone to be able to take him at that contract. So we're not starting Sample or the Bengals defense either, even though you might be able to convince me to start the Bengals defense if none of the other better options are out there. They just haven't done enough for me to feel confident about it, but I do think this would be a defensive game. Joe Burrow, I do like him as a player, but this should be a rough matchup for him. We're not starting any of the other options. On the Colts side, as we mentioned, the Bengals are more exploitable in the run game than anywhere else. So Jonathan Taylor remains a good start here. And obviously, if you have the Colts defense, they've been pretty elite at this point. So we're going to keep starting them, especially here at home. Pretty much everywhere else, I'm just not excited. Like Nyheim Hines, a little bit more involved, but he just hasn't looked anywhere near as explosive as he did in that first week. And he hasn't been involved enough in the past game to really make him worth the flex. T.Y. Hilton and Zach Pascal, if one of these guys scores a touchdown, he'll have a decent game. But Phillip Rivers has just been terrible. So it's very hard to trust anyone at this point in the passing game. Trey Burton had 5 targets last week, but just between Burton and Doyle and Mo Alley Cox, I'm not excited about anyone on this team. Jonathan Taylor has been moderately good. We're hoping for a bigger game. His blowout, we're still expecting at some point they'll click and start giving him the carries that he needs, getting him on the outside. They've just been running him so boringly, running him up the middle, very rarely getting him in space. Had 3 targets last week, which is good, but he had 6 targets in week 1. He's clearly an explosive playmaker. They've got to find a way to utilize him more if he's going to end up realizing the fantasy value that we think he can have. But at this point, remains a good start against the Bengals. I just expect this to be a pretty low-scoring game. And honestly, I'm calling for the upset. I got the Bengals winning this one tightly. I got the Bengals at 17 and the Colts at 13. I just want to real quick say thank you. Thank you, John. You're my first donation. I know, been doing this for a little while, but finally able to, be monetized. It's a cool experience to be able to do this for you guys, but the fact that you appreciate my advice enough to even give like anything like that is like so like I'm so appreciative of that. I really do appreciate even just the fact that you watch and comment on the videos. Do my best to continue to stay as up to date and accurate as possible for you guys. You know, a little bit of background for me. I've been playing fantasy football for about 11 years now. I feel at this point like I'm pretty good at reading the tea leaves. Obviously, any analyst that tells you they know everything is stupid, because you're gonna miss a lot. Like, the best analyst is going to be accurate 60% of the time. So my goal is to just be as accurate as possible, if not more so than everyone else. But of course, I'm going to make mistakes. That being said, doing the best to be as accurate for you guys as possible, and owning up when we do make a mistake, trying to figure out the best way to ramify that. But thank you guys so much for watching. For those of you that are watching now, I really do appreciate you. All right, let's jump over and talk about the Detroit Lions and the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is going to be a sneaky good game, especially for DFS. I have a feeling I'm going to have a lot of exposure to this game in tournaments this week. Should be a very high-scoring game. Now, there is the caveat. We are monitoring the injuries for both DJ Chark and Laviska Shenault. If those guys miss, then take back what I just said. This is going to be a boring game. But if DJ Chark and Laviska Shenault can play this week, very excited about both passing offenses in this one. We got a 54.5 point over-under, which is really good. Lions are favored to win this one on the road by 3. Should signal what we're expecting here in terms of the shootout potential. Both of these teams have been really poor at slowing offenses down through the air and on the ground. The Lions are giving up the 10th most points to quarterbacks, the 4th most to running backs, and the 10th most to receivers. Been better against tight ends, but they haven't really faced any good tight ends yet to speak of, whereas the Jaguars have been pretty below average as well. So in terms of, you know, a good fantasy matchup, this is what we typically love to keen in on for shootout potential, when you got two offenses that are really good playing against two defenses that are really bad. Obviously, Matt Patricia should also be on that list of people fighting for their job alongside Adam Gase. We've already seen 2 coaches already get fired at this point. If I had to tell you before the season started, I would have expected there to be 3 or 4 guys fired before the season is over, and Matt Patricia and Adam Gase are definitely on that list. So if we're expecting him to come out swinging, coming out of the bye week with a healthy team, get Kenny Golladay fully recovered, maybe be able to get Marvin Jones involved eventually, should be a pretty high-scoring game here. In terms of who we're starting, you know, Lions side is pretty easy. We're starting Stafford this week. We're going to keep playing him in good matchups. He hasn't really tanked at this point, even though he hasn't been quite the prolific passer that we were hoping for. Obviously, coming into last year, you know, he was on pace to have one of his best seasons ever before he suffered that back injury. Hasn't come back to that pace quite yet, but overall, he's been pretty consistent at, you know, hovering around that quarterback 10-12 for the past couple weeks. Good matchup here against the Jaguars. We saw Deshaun Watson have a get-right game against them, and I think Matt Stafford does the same thing. Kenny Golladay is a locked-in wide receiver 1 as long as he's healthy. And TJ Hawkinson, although not involved as we'd like him to be, still been involved in the red zone, and you're going to be starting him just based on the fact that tight ends, there's not that many good starters out there. I have Marvin Jones in my second guess category, but I do think this is a sneaky start for him this week. The Jaguars have been pretty susceptible to big plays, and Marvin Jones, although he has looked a little washed up to this point, maybe through the bye week, if you need a spot start, you're in a deeper league, someone dropped him, I do think Marvin Jones could have an okay week this week, and if he completely sucks this week, then you can just cut him and forget that he even exists. On the running game side, one of these guys will probably have a good game. Adrian Peterson has been getting the majority of the carries, whereas DeAndre Swift has been more involved in the passing game. In PPR leagues, I'm probably a little more inclined to start DeAndre Swift, even though I think Adrian Peterson will continue to see the goal line work. It's hard to really trust either of these guys, even in a good matchup, but based on your lineup choices and based on how deep your leagues are, you might not have an option. I have these guys ranked just outside my top 24, so do with that as you will. If you have to start one of them, I guess I would go Peterson regardless, even though Swift has more of a ceiling in PPR. I don't trust Kerryon Johnson at all. I'm not starting Danny Amendola or Jesse James. I just don't think their upside is there. On the Jaguars side, I have asterisks here because, again, as we mentioned already, we're monitoring the injury situation for Laviska Shenault and DJ Chark. If both of these guys miss, it's basically just get out of the passing game for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm not starting Minshew if both of those guys are out. If Chark is out, I'm a little bit more hesitant to start Minshew because we saw what he looked like in that game on Thursday night a few weeks ago when DJ Chark had missed. He looked like he was he sorely missed DJ Chark without having that big body on the outside, luring away the defenders. It was really hard for Gardner Minshew to operate the way that he wanted to in that game. So hopefully DJ Chark plays. If he doesn't, I'm a little bit more hesitant, especially if both he and Shenault don't play. But if everyone's playing, everyone's active, I like all of those options this week. Of course, you're starting James Robinson. Lions are one of the worst rush defenses to every team and every running back with the exception of Kenyon Drake, who sucks. But James Robinson has been absolutely phenomenal up to this point. If you picked him up off waivers, he has definitely been the waiver MVP up to this point. You're going to keep playing him until he gives you a reason to stop. Keelan Cole, if both Shenault and Chark are out and you need like a dart throw, I think Keelan Cole is a decent guy there. He scored a touchdown last week, but overall has definitely been playing third fiddle behind Chark and Shenault. Not starting Conley or Thompson or any of these other guys, even if Shenault and Chark are out. If they're out, I'm just trying to avoid the passing options there on Jacksonville. I got the Lions winning this one 24-17. So obviously I think this one is going to go a little bit below. I think I have my prediction based on the fact that I think Chark will miss time. But if Chark ends up playing this week, you can probably add 7 points to both of these teams. Let's push us closer to the over. But yeah, I think you're keying in on that as well, John. The fact that you think that Chark is going to sit. The problem is it's the fact that he's dealing with an ankle injury. It's the same ankle he's injured 5 times now. So this has become a chronic problem for him, which is really, it's a bummer for the guy. But the fact that it's the same ankle that he's injured 5 times now, you're probably right. I do think he sits, which is why I have my prediction a little bit in the under category. So I'd love to see this one turn into a shootout. If Chark is active, I think it can. But without Chark, it makes me hesitant to trust Minshew this week. And Detroit most certainly does need to give DeAndre Swift more work. I think it will happen. Maybe we need to see maybe we need to see him get fired first, Patricia get fired first, before Swift gets more involved, which doesn't make sense because why would you draft him in the second round and then proceed to not use him when he could save your job? But I don't know. Hang on to DeAndre Swift. If you have him on your roster, don't be dropping him or trying to trade him cheap. Just hang on. He'll be a league winner at some point, just like Miles Sanders was last year. All right. Let's take a look at another boring game on the week. We've got the Chicago Bears and the Carolina Panthers. The Chicago Bears have been the dominant defense that they had been, 2017, 2018. 2019, they've kind of taken a step back, but it looks like they're right back, especially against the passing options here. And the Carolina Panthers, with the exception of their non-existent run defense, have been sneakily good at stopping quarterbacks and receivers. Right now, they're actually 30th at stopping quarterbacks, or 30th in terms of points allowed. So very good at stopping quarterbacks, 27th against receivers and 26th tight ends. But again, the number one running defense in terms of points allowed. The Bears have been pretty good across the board, 31st against quarterbacks and receivers. I believe the first touchdown that they allowed to a receiver was the Mike Evans touchdown on Thursday night last week, which shouldn't even have happened had they called the play right with Ronald Jones trying to do his best Des Bryant impersonation and then not selling it after the fact. But leave that as it may. The Bears' pass defense has been lights out. So it's going to sound a little weird when I still suggest that you start Anderson and DJ Moore, but let me try to convince you. Overall, I think this is going to be a pretty low-scoring game, as does Vegas. We've got a 45-point over-under. Panthers are actually favored to win this one by 1.5. I think the Bears are the most fraudulent 4-1 team right now, so I definitely agree with Vegas's slant towards the Panthers, but I do think it will be a close game. On the Bears side, we're starting David Montgomery. You start every running back with the exception of Kenyon Drake against the Panthers. David Montgomery should have a pretty solid game in this one. I know he put up a decent amount of fantasy points last week, even though it came mostly through the air and scoring a touchdown. This is a better matchup. The Bucs have a good run defense. The Panthers do not. David Montgomery is going to win a lot of people money this week. He's probably going to be heavily owned in DFS as well. It probably end up being chalk. If he's not, it doesn't make any sense, and he'll win a lot of people money. Allen Robinson has been absolutely dominant. I don't care that the Panthers' pass defense has been good. You can't bench Allen Robinson for anything at this point. As long as Nick Foles is going to continue to give him double-digit targets each week, he's going to continue to remain an elite wide receiver 1 for fantasy. I think you can start the Bears' defense in this one as well. Look for them to put a little bit more pressure on Teddy than he's seen in the past couple weeks. Jimmy Graham is the interesting call here. So we saw Jimmy Graham obviously score last week, and he's looked better. Like, he's looked better than he did ever at any point for the Packers, and ever since he tore that patella tendon for the Seahawks. Like, he just hasn't been the same guy. So we'll see what he can do against the Panthers this week. You might not have an option. Like, if you're trying to decide between Jimmy Graham or like Trey Burton, I would still go Jimmy Graham. I think I have him ranked at like 13th on the week, so you can check my rankings on my website if you're curious who I would start over him. But I think you probably have a better option. Otherwise, you can start him. But I'm not starting anyone else on this offense. Between Anthony Miller and Darnell Mooney, they've been splitting too many touches, and neither of them have really gotten any significant targets outside of Allen Robinson. So we're not going to be going towards any of those options until they start to establish more of a clear-cut role. On the Panthers side, Mike Davis has been absolutely phenomenal. I do not believe that Christian McCaffrey is going to be back this week. Matt Rule said in a press conference that he did not believe that was going to happen this week. Look for him to potentially be back in week 7 or 8. As long as Christian McCaffrey is out, we're going to continue to start Mike Davis because he has been absolutely lights out. It's been, other than James Robinson, has been the best fantasy waiver wire pickup through the year. He's been winning people weeks alone. He's put up like 29 fantasy points last week, and we're hoping he has another good game here. We saw Ronald Jones have a pretty good game against the Bears last week, so look for Mike Davis to reprise that and give you a little bit more in the passing game. So as we talked about with the Bears, very good against receivers. It's just very hard for me to bench Robbie Anderson at this point. Robbie Anderson has been absolutely lights out. Been very disappointing because I'm a DJ Moore truther. I've liked him for quite some time, and it's hurting my soul to see Robbie Anderson get so many more targets than DJ Moore, but I don't think the Bears are going to be able to slow these guys down. I think they get enough targets, even if it ends up being like a 8 reception for 80-yard game where they don't score a touchdown. I think both of these guys are going to get enough targets and yards to still be worth it in PPR. If you had to tell me to bench one, I guess I would bench DJ Moore, but I would prefer to at least see, last week we saw DJ Moore was able to house one from a deep distance, and that's what we know DJ Moore to be, a really good yards after the catch receiver. So I still have confidence in starting both of these guys this week, even in a tougher matchup. It's a game at home, and I do think the Panthers are a little bit underrated on offense. Teddy Bridgewater doesn't get the respect he deserves, even though we're not starting Teddy Bridgewater this week. Curtis Samuel was involved last week, but I think there won't be as many points scored. This isn't the Falcons we're talking about here, so I'm pretty much starting Davis, Anderson, and DJ Moore and nobody else, and I guess you could give me an argument for why I wouldn't even start DJ Moore. I'm just saying I trust him enough, but again, I'm a truther, so keep that in mind. Got the Panthers winning this one 19-16, so low score game, but overall, I think the Panthers can knock off the Bears and send them to 4-2. Yeah, Carolina defense just dropped back and forced nothing but dinks and dunks. I mean, yeah, and that's kind of what we expected from Teddy Bridgewater, right? He's been hitting some deep balls, but for the most part, that's the exact offense that they want to run. throw it to Mike Davis, throw it to Robbie Anderson short. I'm surprised that DJ Moore hasn't seen more of the targets that we've seen Robbie Anderson get, because that's kind of his MO. Like, they've kind of flipped the roles from what I was expecting. Like, prior to the season started, if you would have told me that Robbie Anderson was going to be getting the short and intermediate targets, whereas DJ Moore was going to see more of the downfield targets, I would have said that makes no sense based on their profiles. What we've seen in the past was Robbie Anderson was always the deep ball guy, whereas DJ Moore is the guy that was getting like those short cross and slant routes and, being able to get 20, 30 yards after the catch, kind of like we saw against the Falcons on Sunday. So they've kind of reversed roles, which has been perplexing to me, but Robbie Anderson has played it well. I'd just like to see both of those guys used in that way, because I think they can both be incredibly productive. Doesn't make sense for them to continue to have DJ Moore run the deeper routes when, I know, again, truther status, but DJ Moore is one of the best yards after the catch receivers in the league. So they really need to see if they can get him involved in some of those shorter targets as well. So, you're saying that their defense is forcing dinks and done. Well, that's true too. They play their defense the way that they play their offense, which I guess it makes sense because that's what they're practicing against. But you're correct. They have been what you would call a bend but don't break defense. They allow a lot of yards, but they're able to slow them down in the end. And they forced a lot of turnovers this year. I've actually been very surprised by that. I didn't really expect too much from the Carolina secondary, but considering the lack of big name players that they have, they've done a pretty good job at keeping games close and forcing quarterbacks to be a little bit more uneasy than I would have expected. I would take Gibson over Devonta Freeman this week. Okay, let's jump over and talk about the Washington football team and the New York Giants. Another gross game. I feel like half of it, or more than half of the morning game slate options here are kind of gross. We see that every week where there's a couple of really exciting matchups and then other ones that I'm not really that excited to watch. But we've also seen some of those turn into some good games. This one I don't think is going to be turning into a good game anytime soon, but we'll see. Stranger things have happened. Right now, this is a 43-point over-under. The Giants are favored to win. Yay, Giants fans, finally. 23-20 implied point total. Washington has been really good at slowing down receivers, not so much at quarterbacks or running backs or tight ends, whereas the Giants have actually been a little underrated on defense, especially with Bradbury back there. He's been really slowing down the opposing team's alpha receiver. Now, Terry McLaurin has faced some pretty tough cornerback shadows, and it hasn't slowed him down. But that was with Dwayne Haskins. We saw Kyle Allen and Alex Smith last week come in, and they weren't hyper-targeting McLaurin as much. So we'll talk about that in a second. Looking at who we're starting this week, I think you can start Gibson. Gibson has continued to see his workload increase, even though McKissick had the better week last week. I think Gibson is still the better talent. I'm going to continue to bet on the better talent. And, he's seen more snaps pretty much consecutively each week. So I think this is going to be a good start for him. The Giants are much worse against the run than they are against the pass. So I think Gibson is a good start this week. Now, Terry McLaurin, as we mentioned, if he ends up getting shadowed by Bradbury, that could be a bad thing, especially if Kyle Allen is throwing the ball again this week. I do think Kyle Allen starts. So while I have McLaurin in my rankings of someone that I would start, I'm a bit nervous about it. And I'm just being honest with you guys because it's been a while since we've seen an elite receiver. Like Amari Cooper got completely shut down last week. I don't think we've really seen a receiver do well, at least the leading receiver against the Giants do well since week 1 with Juju Smith-Schuster. So a little bit nervous about that one. But again, McLaurin has been able to overcome good cornerback shadows up to this point. So I guess you can still get the vote of confidence from me. Really, the play that you want to do here is you want to play the defenses in this game, because I think both of these teams are going to be sacking each other the entire game. There should be plenty of turnovers by both sides. We know both Kyle Allen and Daniel Jones love to fumble the ball, love to throw interceptions, so this should be a fun game if you own either Washington or the Giants defense. On the Giants side, I think Devonta Freeman, we've seen him finally be able to get firmly entrenched in that role. Not that it's like a prolific role, because the Giants have the worst offensive line in the league right now, but we did see Freeman punch one in from the end zone last week. This could be a situation where if the Giants get a couple of short drives based on being able to force a turnover, we should be able to see Devonta Freeman at least put up some fantasy numbers. He's on my fringe between my RB2s and RB3s, so he's an okay start this week. Darius Slayton has been very up and down, but I think this should be a good week for him. Washington's secondary is exploitable. We're going to go back to the well with Evan Ingram one more time. I feel like this is the same thing with Zach Ertz. This is a really good matchup. The Washington football team is not good at slowing down tight ends. Evan Ingram has looked good. The problem is the way that they've been using him. He's run more curl routes than any receiver up to this point, which makes no sense for the type of athlete that Evan Ingram is. I don't know that we can have faith that the Giants coaching staff is going to turn things around, but hopefully. Good matchup against Washington. Probably don't have a better option. I'm going to give Ingram one more try before he's dead to me. I'm not playing Golden Tate, and I'm not playing any of the quarterbacks in this game. I got the Giants winning this one barely, 21-20. All right, let's talk about the game that was canceled last week. Now we get a little more information, and it looks like by nature of the game being postponed, we now will potentially see both of these teams have their starting quarterbacks, which I think will at least make this game a little more interesting. Cam Newton returning to the team tomorrow, and it looks like Drew Lock could be active as well. So, should be a fun game, at least in terms of being able to see what these teams can do with their quarterbacks, but I do think the Patriots are definitely going to be the heavy favorites here. Right now, they're slated to win this game by 9.5 points. This is a 46.5 point over-under. In terms of where the Broncos have been strong, they've been a salve for quarterbacks, receivers, and tight ends, but they've been the best team at slowing down the run. Not good news for those of us that are wanting to trot Damian Harris out there. I don't know that the Patriots if they're an exception to this rule because of the fact that they have so many running backs, and that's just the way that their team runs, and the fact that their quarterback is also a good runner in his own right. So we'll see what the Broncos' run defense will most certainly be tested this week. On the Patriots side, they've been pretty good at stopping the run as well. Not nearly as good as slowing down the pass as we've seen in years past. I don't know if Stephon Gilmore will be off the COVID list. I don't believe so. So I do think that the Broncos will have at least some decent passing options here. So we'll talk about that. I'll basically leave it based on whether or not Stephon Gilmore plays. I think I had originally set my rankings assuming he was there, but now I'm remembering the fact that he's on the COVID list. Might need to adjust my rankings, so we'll give you some nuance when we talk about our starts here. Because originally I was saying you just want to start either Gordon or Lindsey. And at this point, I would say Gordon probably doesn't play. We saw this morning, the news broke that Melvin Gordon had received a DUI. We're expecting there to be some type of discipline from the league, potentially a game suspension or multi-game suspension. Philip Lindsay practicing in full. Looks like he's recovered completely from that toe injury. So if Gordon is out and Lindsay is the main guy, I think you can start him up with confidence. If Gordon ends up playing, I would still play Gordon over Lindsay, even with this situation going on. He's just... I guess Lindsay's been the better running back over the course of the past couple years, but in the only week that we've seen both of them, Melvin Gordon looked better than Lindsay, at least in the touches that he got. So I'm just going to say I think Gordon is out this week, and I think you can play Lindsay as a result of Gordon missing time. Now, if Stephon Gilmore is out, you can start Jerry Jeudy, and you could probably talk me into starting Tim Patrick as well. But I do think that's chasing points from the last time we saw the Broncos. with Drew Lock was pretty hyper-focused on Jerry Jeudy through the first 2 weeks, or at least the time that he played with them. I do believe that Drew Lock will be healthy for this game, and we should see him back. So start up Jerry Jeudy if Stephon Gilmore is out. If not, I'm just nervous that this is going to be like a game where the Patriots just absolutely steamroll over the Broncos. So I'm trying to avoid as many options as I can. But I think Jeudy at least makes an interesting start if Stephon Gilmore is out. On the Patriots side, we're going to fire up Cam Newton again, with the exception of the game against the Raiders. He's been a top 10 quarterback and should remain so. Julian Edelman had a pretty poor game against the Chiefs, but that was with Jarrett Stidham and Brian Hoyer playing. He had a really good start to the season with Cam Newton, so I'm going to fire him up, especially with the Broncos' pass defense being pretty poor. And Patriots defense, with the exception of the Ravens, probably make an argument for them being the best defense on the week. As we mentioned, the Broncos are really good at slowing down fantasy running backs, so that makes this a hard recommendation for either James White or Damian Harris. You might be in a situation where you have to start one of them. I'm not telling you cannot do it, because we saw Damian Harris look pretty good against the Chiefs defense, who have been okay against the run, and that was the first game back. And then James White could end up being better just by nature of him being used more in the passing game. So if I had to start one between these two guys, I would go James White, but you might be forced to start one or the other just based on bye weeks and roster needs. N'Keal Harry and Damiere Byrd. Here's the real question. Damiere Byrd had 10 targets, but that was with Brian Hoyer and Stidham. N'Keal Harry has scored a few touchdowns this year, but he hasn't looked good. Between these two guys, one of them will probably have a good fantasy day. I don't know who. I feel like it's a coin flip at this point. If you want to take a gamble there, I'd probably go Harry over Byrd, but I could see a world where Byrd ends up taking over at that wide receiver 2 spot for the Patriots going forward. Rex Burkhead, I think, is pretty much relegated as long as there's James White is back. Burkhead was seeing the passing volume that James White had when he was out for those few weeks. But as long as James White is healthy, it's going to be difficult to be trusting Rex Burkhead for much of anything at this point. That being said, like I mentioned, I had the Patriots pretty much steamrolling the Broncos. I got them winning 24-13. And I believe that is my final prediction for the early games. We'll be back tomorrow with the later games, going over the other 5 games. No Thursday night game tomorrow. We saw the Bills and Chiefs were scheduled for the Thursday night game, but they had to be moved back up to Monday because of the COVID Titans having to play on Tuesday night. So no Thursday game. We get a few days off to just get some rest and relaxation and pay attention to the practice squads or practice reports, and see who's injured this week. I'm not ending the stream yet. Let me go through some of your comments. It looks like you guys are having a fun little conversation over here between John and Dylan. So let's see what we got going on here. Caden Smith and Dynasty. I know that's what the perception is, that Ingram is busted right now, and maybe it is. But I want to blame. Oh gosh, his name is what's the Cowboys coach that is the offensive coordinator? I don't know why his name is slipping my mind right now, but the way that he is deploying him in the offense, he is acting like Evan Ingram is Jason Witten, and it just makes absolutely no sense. So I feel it's more a usage than talent at this point. I mean, like I said, they keep having him run curl routes. He almost had that really nice touchdown on the trick play off the fake field goal. There's just some bogus flag that was called that I still to this point have no idea why they threw that flag in the Cowboys-Giants game. So give Evan Ingram one more week. You can stash Caden Smith anyway, because if you're in a dynasty league and you got deep rosters, I get it. That's a decent move to make, but I don't think I don't think he's washed just yet. But we should know in a week or two. Should I trade Mahomes and Lockett for Thielen and Mostert? That one is tough. I typically do recommend trading quarterbacks in standard leagues. If this is like a 4-point for touchdown league, Adam Thielen has been lights out, and honestly, Raheem Mostert has been a top 10 running back in points per game. So I would probably do that trade, even though I love Mahomes and Lockett. It's going to be more dependent on your roster as to whether or not you really need another running back. because I feel like Thielen and Lockett, Lockett has had 2 down weeks and he's on bye this week, but Lockett will rebound. He should, be up there near the same tier as Adam Thielen, at least if not a tier below. So you're not getting a massive upgrade from Lockett to Thielen, and going from Mahomes to Mostert sounds weird unless you have a good quarterback backup option like a Ryan Tannehill or a Cam Newton. So I guess it depends on who you can pick up for quarterback, but if you're in need of running back help, I do think that one could end up being better for you in the long run. Okay, I should have looked at the rest of the comments because you guys actually went over it. So you got Drake, Gibson, Swift, and Eckler on IR. I mean, you definitely need running back help there. You might be able to get a little more, but again, Mostert has been a top 10 running back. I feel like he's been a bit better and more consistent than I was expecting him to be. So I don't hate that trade for you. I don't like trading Patrick Mahomes or Tyler Lockett, but I think that one helps you, and it helps you this week. So if that's the only option you've been able to find for helping your running back spot, which is pretty suspect right now, I do think that having Mostert would definitely help in that regard. I mean, you do have AJ Brown, which is really nice too, Parker and Slayton. So, I mean, AJ Brown is going to end up being really consistent for you. I know Lockett had a couple of down games, but as I mentioned, I do think he'll be fine. Let's see. Yeah, John agrees with me that it's a good trade for you. So like I said, I'm not worried about Lockett at all, but I do think Adam Thielen will be a little bit more consistent, and Mostert has been good for you. See if there are any other questions here. Thank you guys. Oh, Jason Garrett. Thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, Jason Garrett is a turd, and I blame him for Evan Ingram's poor performance, but I'm biased. Should I take Tannehill over Matt Ryan or Herbert over him? Take Tannehill because Herbert is on bye week. I don't want to roster a quarterback on bye. And Tannehill is a great start against the Houston Texans this week. Honestly, he's been a great start almost every week up to this point. So, yeah. So if you make that trade for sure, I think Tannehill is probably your best option. All right. Guys, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back again tomorrow night, and we will go over the rest of the games. But I do appreciate every single one of you watching, you guys commenting. You make this a lot more fun. I do appreciate you, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good night.